What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and normally I'm critically analyzing apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. But tonight we are having a discussion with Gabriel from American Revival, and we're going to be discussing morality. The moral argument for God's existence, I guess. So, Gabriel, do you want to tell everybody like who you are, what you do, and all that kind of good stuff?
Sure. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm glad to provide some streamlining to the show. Instead of you debating apologetics, they're far away. I'm going to be right here. So this hopefully should streamline everyone's job. But my name is Gabriel Irvin. We were just quipping before the show that we had the same initials. This may be confusing. But, I'm a Christian. I work in the United Methodist Church. I've been a delegate to the annual conference 3 times. I'm 21 years old, so I've been I've been a Bible nerd for my entire life. So here I am. I do like an element of what you do. I have to give you credit for this. I always like to encourage my fellow Christians to critically challenge and question their faith, because I actually believe, in my experience, that has made it stronger. And that doesn't work for all people. I understand that, but I am currently the founder and chairman of the American Revival Front. We are a service, charity, and action organization active in the state of Michigan. We have chapters as far away as California. We're not an explicitly religious organization. However, we do have a lot of Christian members, and we seek to promote service and charitable giving amongst our chapters. We've organized political protests. At the University of Michigan, we were instrumental in raising the minimum wage for student employees. And we've been encouraging increased club spending for the student government instead of spending it on, like $4,000 pizza parties that nobody shows up to. So I like to keep my activism in the church and outside of the church as lively as possible.
Who's spending $4,000 on pizza?
The University of Michigan Central Student Government spent, I know, $2,000 on an outside in November in Michigan, or it might have been February, movie night. So I don't know if any of y'all have ever been to the upper Midwest, but February is not the ideal time for an outdoor movie night. So we've been witnessing all sorts of spending snafus like that. So we've been trying to put a stop to that. But that's what I've been doing on the temporal side. On the religious side, I've said I'm a Methodist. I'm actually working together with several others to put together a Bible study for this summer camp, which I'm about to head off to. And I thought this was a great way to kind of inaugurate my going to Bible camp, is having a debate with the good godless engineer over here.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, I really don't think I'd do too well at a Bible camp. Not because I wouldn't know the Bible, because I feel like I have a fairly good grasp of the Bible. It's just I feel like I would probably ask too many questions.
I love questions. I love dealing with questions, and you're probably going to be harder than any of the high school questions that I have. So, I better test myself against the best before I go off into camp for the summer. So thank you.
Well, I mean, so what are you teaching? I'm guessing you're teaching at this camp, right?
You're a pretty good guesser. You got good engineer's intuition, because yes, I am doing a lot of the teaching. I'm not doing the Sunday morning, but I'm doing the small groups in the afternoon for a few different groups. And what we're talking about mostly is we're talking about the Beatitudes. And being a Methodist, we do have a healthy dose of more progressive theologians who kind of temper me a little bit when I get a little too in the fire and brimstone, as they would say. But we have a pretty healthy balance of progressive and conservative theology. Now, personally, I'm actually a Democrat, but theologically, I'm very conservative. But that's the kind of stuff we teach at Bible camp. The Beatitudes, we're going to be going over Bible verses. We're going to be studying. I always encourage questions about the historicity of the Bible. Like, for example, last year we did a Christmas theme, and we talked a lot about the language that went into the term governor in Syria. How could Quirinius be the governor of Syria at the same time that there was a client king? Was that census that occurred, did that really happen? And we dive into the grammar of the Gospels to say, look, wait a minute. Caesar is declaring there should be not an empire-wide census, but local census, and all these other things like that. We deal a lot with the historical questions of the Bible. That's not in the lesson, but that's an as arises basis, because I always encourage, especially the high schoolers who are questioning their faith, to ask a lot of questions to really dig down into it.
Well, I think the biggest thing right there, maybe after this, maybe we can get to the topic that we came here for. But I think the biggest thing there is the discrepancy between Matthew's gospel and Luke's gospel, because one of them does have the Quirinius thing, but then the other one has Herod, and so that's, I think.
So the argument for that, we've been looking into that, and I've been reading. I used to have like actually a list of sources for this. If I could find it, I'd bring it up. But one of the things is that the term governor in Roman was very flexible, because this was before language had developed a lot into what we know it today. So, for example, governor back then could be used in a very broad term, meaning one who governs. It didn't mean our modern definition of this person who governs this specific area at this specific time. We have many records of replacement governors coming in, or people, overseers of sorts, coming in at various times. So the explanation that we have is that Herod, being quite advanced in his age, as well as being decrepit and from his hedonistic lifestyle. And I don't mean hedonistic. I think hedonistic in even terms you'd agree, drinking and whoring around and abusing his citizens. I think we can both agree, objectively, morality-wise, that drinking and whoring and discriminating against your populace is objectively bad thing. See, I turned it into our main discussion.
I think that last part is probably the thing that I would agree is bad. But anyways, go ahead.
Well, you'd agree it's bad if you have other responsibilities, like taking care of an entire nation.
No, I mean, we maybe we can get to that later. But anyways,
we're talking about Quirinius and all that stuff. So
right. Okay, so anyways, we're here to talk about the argument for morality, and I'm wondering if you wanted to start us off with giving us like your understanding of the argument, or maybe how you employ it to suggest or prove that your God specifically exists.
Yes, I appreciate that last contingent. I'm not arguing for the Baha'i faith. I'm not arguing for Hinduism. I have no expertise in those religions. I would have no idea how to begin to defend their cosmologies or teleologies or any of the other ologies we like in theology. See, that's another ology. But I would say that we have objective morality. There are some things that are objectively immoral. I'm not going to no true Scotsman it into oblivion. The fact of the matter is that if you are a newborn child is placed in front of you, you shouldn't kill it. That's a natural human instinct. You obviously have societies that acted contrary to this. For example, the Spartans would see something that was wrong with a baby and they'd chuck it off a mountain. Now, here's the thing. Did that society know it was objectively wrong? There were people in that society who did know it was objectively wrong. The mothers cried over it. The fathers were horribly broken by it. And it was a tradition that was kept alive only by a repressive totalitarian state. So there you have natural morality revolting against societally imposed morality. But if objective morality exists in the modern world, there must be a transcendent source of values, which we can identify as a theistic God. Objective moral values, such as the belief, in my opinion, that murdering newborns is wrong, cannot be subjective or suggestive, an opinion or a societal construct. The existence of moral law implies a moral lawgiver. I'd also note that people have objective moral duties. A moral lawgiver is the one who imposes these moral duties. People often have a sense of obligation or duty to act in a certain way. For example, if somebody shows up at your door who's just been shot and is bleeding out, no matter what you actually do, in your mind, your first sense is obviously a little bit of suspicion how to get shot, but you're also very concerned about the death of a human life. These things are naturally concerning to you. Additionally, we know that telling the truth within a rounding error, like 90% of instances, telling the truth is a right thing to do. Helping those in need, helping the poor is the right thing to do. This sense of moral duty, it impels us to believe in the existence of a higher authority that prescribes and enforces moral obligations. Last one. If humans are not morally accountable for their actions, there must be a God who holds them accountable. The idea of moral accountability, what it does is it says that there is a final judgment and helps to keep humans accountable. Justice is served and wrong actions are properly punished. Without a theistic God, moral accountability would be arbitrary or non-existent. Now, this last one is not necessarily for you, but it's for those MTDs out there, those moralistic therapeutic deists who, they do believe in God, but they just don't believe in the Bible or any other set of morality. So there's a large group of people over there, and I'd like to say that. And there's all things about moral order, moral development, and things like that. But those are the two that I would like to lead with the third on the end. So the argument for moral values and the argument for moral duties.
Okay. So let's start off with your very first part here, and that's that, if you lay a baby in front of somebody, you instinctually know that it's wrong to kill the baby.
Yes.
and you think that that's sort of like an innate thing that just everybody knows.
I believe it's a priori knowledge for the vast majority of the human population. We do have, certainly we'd have exceptions such as people like psychopaths who have this sort of deviance. And it's acknowledged, by the way, that they do have a deviance psychologically.
But you can't have exceptions.
Absolutely you can have exceptions. Many.
I don't think that you can.
Now, I think that things that apply for the vast majority of the population, especially within it's like when you especially have a name for the people that don't have it, usually implies otherwise universal existence. For example, we know that 99% of whatever is in a glass of water is H2O, but the other little teeny tiny bit is hydronium. You have this little teeny tiny exception, but it doesn't mean that the glass isn't filled with water. I mean, you have these little teeny tiny exceptions. They happen in science. They happen in philosophy. They happen in other things too. They happen in biology, oodles and oodles. So I don't think it's
okay.
valuable.
Let me ask you this.
Of course.
Let me ask you this. Are you of the like? Is your understanding of God and moral laws and everything like that, is that these moral laws are written on our hearts?
Yeah, I would say to a large instance. Now, I'm not a Calvinist, but Calvinists would go down the line and say it's prescribed in our hearts from the beginning, and some people it is and some people it isn't. Now, see, if I was a Calvinist, I could take an easy way out of your argument and say, okay, well, the people who don't have it just aren't elect. They aren't bent towards goodness. But I would also say that there are psychopaths who aren't murderers. There are sociopaths who don't manipulate people around them. There are narcissists who try to live good lives, and it's because they know objectively that these things are wrong. There's been many studies about whether psychopaths
do they know that
wrong.
These things are wrong, or have they been told that these things are wrong?
You know, that's a great question.
Their experience that these things are wrong.
Scientific inquiry, psychological inquiry, is actually still going into this about whether psychopaths know what they're doing is morally wrong. The jury is still out on that one. I mean, I'm sure you can find one study that goes this way and one study that goes that way. But the question of whether psychopaths have a sort of like thing that says, well, I know this is wrong, but I'm going to do it anyways, is up for debate. You can probably find studies that go either way. I've seen studies that say psychopaths do know that's what's morally wrong.
I feel like the definition of psychopathy is the fact that you don't inherently know that something is wrong, or that you don't know these social norms, or that you don't know that deviating from these social norms is a bad or wrong thing. You also lack empathy, which is another thing, which is a factor that goes into the fact that they don't see anything wrong with like killing another person.
Yeah. So we have.
Why would God make somebody like that?
So that's a good question, and I honestly can say we don't really know what happens with all these things. Now, there's of course a lot of human factors that go into what happens to someone's DNA when they're conceived, what happens in the womb. We know birth control has effects on the genetics. We know PFAS, the forever chemicals that are in the water. I mean, they do have psychological effects on children. We know that certain chemicals in the water actually lean towards giving people. I mean, we know this is. I mean, you saw the lead in the water at Flint. That caused several cases of psychological disorders in developing children. We know that stuff in the poison water can affect embryonic and things like that. And so I obviously can't provide a full explanation.
But I feel like what you just said is that birth control causes people to be psychopaths.
No, I'm saying that birth control and other such outsider variables have influences on the development of the fetus.
Well, I mean,
I don't think anyone disagrees with that.
Well, okay, so from a naturalistic perspective, I can agree, because the psychopathy and sociopathy, both of those things can be genetic. There's also environmental issues that you can look at for causing those particular mental disorders and everything like that. But I mean, I feel like attacking it from that, in your position. Is really kind of ignoring the ramifications of Christian theology, because Christian theology says that God made them that way, not that, God allowed the environment to change them in that way, or allowed this genetic disease, or maybe God did allow this genetic disease, but in either case, God could have prevented those psychopaths and sociopaths from being born the way that they were.
Yeah, I understand your argument. And first, I'd like to cite, just on the thing we went before, somebody said cite a source, and it's Mike Sema, Franca Tanier, and Mark D. Hauser's article published it was published in a neuroscience magazine. I have the DOI for everyone, but it says the results of their study. This is from the abstract. These results force a rejection of the strong hypothesis that emotional processes are caused necessarily from judgments or moral dilemmas, suggesting instead that psychopaths understand the distinction between right and wrong, but do not care about some knowledge or the consequences that ensue from their morally inappropriate behavior. I can provide the citation for that. Somebody asked for a citation. I must provide.
Right. But in that particular conclusion, I think that there's a difference in understanding why it's right or wrong is different from knowing like the social norms. Like the social norms say that this is wrong. That's different from understanding why it's wrong.
So they did several controls on this test for age, sex, health, delinquents, any other sorts of things. They took people from a variety of psychological contexts. I haven't studied the full methodology, so I'm not going to say this completely rebukes what you're saying. But we do have several patterns in society that are quite consistent. Now, obviously, there are going to be deviations because there are always deviations. Just because people do something doesn't mean it's always right. But I will say this, is that we have right now the fact that we are a fallen race. We fell from the Garden of Eden. We fell from the Garden of Eden. We have polluted our environment. We have despoiled our birthright. We have ruined the environment. We have polluted the skies. We fill people with hatred and animosity and things like that. And we cannot expect God to just step in and go, well, you messed up, time to reset everything and give you all paradise on earth to live in, because he already did that and we messed it up. And so what I will say is this. Well, human suffering, the origin of human suffering right now is human action. And a lot of the times it's not the person's own fault. And that is awfully sad. No, it isn't the person's fault. If somebody drinks poison water while they're pregnant, that's not their fault that their baby ends up with these conditions. And God does not intervene because he has given over the title deed for earth to humanity, and we gave it over to Satan. We gave it over to Satan, not in the garden, but a little bit afterwards. You have the whole thing with Job. You have Satan being cast down from the heavens. And that's a really important thing, is that we gave the earth over to sin.
I'm getting a little bit of whiplash here because we're violently shifting between two different mindsets here. Okay. Because Gabriel, look, on the one hand, you're citing scientific studies and you're talking about all these environmental issues, and I'm like, there can be environmental issues, genetic disorders, and all that cause certain mental conditions like psychopathy and sociopathy. But then we shift over here, and it's like, but you know what? Fucking magic is the reason why shit's happening now. And
this is the problem with debating an apologetics person who's also a Democrat. Is that we switch from agreeing on, the water's poison and corporations are to blame and people are suffering, over to what you consider the realm of Narnia over here with the magic and everything. But, quite frankly, this kind of loyalty towards, we have to have an explanation for everything is really, you may not like this, is a fundamentally Western mindset. You look at Eastern cultures, you look at something like, Pashtunwali, which is the moral governing code of Afghanistan, not of all of Afghanistan, just of the Pashtuns, all right? And you have this moral governing code, which recognizes several things that humans pretty much implicitly know. Now, there are things we definitely don't agree with, and those societally develop over time, but we must look at the commonalities that exist between that moral code and our moral code. One of them is hospitality. Hospitality has always been an innate human Western value. You even had Homer promoting, how good hospitality is, and those who are inhospitable, are very badly punished. You have those, the kings, we have a guest here. We're going to slaughter 300 cows and offer them to the guests and everything like that. So you have these kind of consistent strains in society. In the Bible it says, welcome the stranger into your home. Remember, you were once strangers in a foreign land. When you were taken off as exiles. You have this as a commonality between Pashtunwali, Homeric thought, and the Levantine Christianity and Judaism. What would be your explanation? What would be the atheistic explanation for the commonality of values that seemingly exist within major human structures? Now, I don't care about, some tribe off in the nowhere where there were like 400 of them, they had a completely backwards moral code. I mean, major civilizational pillars, the Greeks, the Romans, things like that. Major.
Well, like, give me some for instances, like of this commonality?
Well, I mean, something like hospitality. Hospitality is noted in the Bible. Hospitality is very noted in Homeric thought. Hospitality is severely emphasized in Pashtun Wali as well. You have other things like what was that place called? Srivijaya, all the way out in modern day Indonesia, which placed this very big premium on welcoming foreigners. In the Middle Kingdom, they used to call it back then China, they had this whole thing about, welcoming foreigners. You had this in many cultural pillars. So why is there this development of similar moral ideas in all of these major cultural pillars? That would be my question. Do these develop naturally? Like, how are humans, predisposed to these things according to a naturalistic worldview?
Well, I mean, if you're looking for commonalities between successful civilizations, I would say that, civilizations influence each other. The people that make up the civilizations, they are the ones that determine the social norms. And so what the rule set or the social norms that allow for a large successful society, I think, are going to have overlap in multiple different versions of it. I think that there's going to be some commonality because I think there are some fundamentally basic things that allow a civilization to survive, thrive, propagate, and last for long periods of time. But I mean, this whole hospitality thing, honestly, I feel like that's at the lower end of like these commonalities.
It's not a frequently emphasized one, though. So, we thought we'd dredge it up.
Well, hold on. But also, would you consider America to be hospitable for the past 275 or more years?
Now, what I would note is this, okay? Obviously, there has been severe moral failings in America. I believe that, it's just as John Brown did, that, America's original sin is slavery. America's original sin is slavery. And after that, it was killing all the people who I'm loosely related to. I'm Native American. I know all about what happened to us. And so, yeah, America's original sin is slavery and the genocide of the Native Americans. I'm not saying that, because we did that, our society is going to crumble. But what I'm saying, when your society has founding principles that aren't hospitable, you're going to end up in a bad situation, because Christian and other civilizations have developed this too, but Christian moral guidelines are usually pretty successful at developing long-lasting Western civilizations. You agreed with me. You agreed with me that there's a formula for civilization.
Do you know what legislators in America based all of their slave laws on?
You're going to say the Bible, and I'm going to counter you with this one example. I'm going to counter you with one example. I was at Boone Hall a few years ago, which is a plantation in South Carolina. Sends chills up my spine when I go see that place. And what I will tell you is this: the Bible that they distributed to the slaves was edited. Not edited in the way that you would say, they changed some declensions over here and there. The slave masters removed entire books from the Bible because they thought that if their slaves read them, that it would inspire slave uprisings. They removed Joshua. They removed Exodus. They removed parts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. If you want to know what a giant, you're going to burn in hellfire forever sin is, it's editing and modifying the word of God in order to sort your political purposes. The big slave rebellions were led by ministers. You had Nat Turner. Nat Turner's rebellion, he was a minister. He was basing what he was doing off of the word of God. The slave masters, implicitly, by editing the Bible, were acknowledging that what they were doing was morally contrary to the Bible. They were acknowledging.
I know about the slave Bible. The slave Bible is very well known, but I think the point there, you're missing the entire point of that, is that you can craft the Bible to support any position because the Bible is all over the place.
Well, you can do that with anything. It's called sophistry.
Hold on. Do you have a Bible near you?
I do, but I think I would knock over my fan if I reach. Let's see. I got one. I got an NIV over here. I had a KJV over there, but I have an NIV right here.
Okay.
We're gonna go with Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. I wrote a whole paper about that.
Nope. We're not. I want you to read something. Would you mind reading?
I'll look it up online. It's a little dark in here. Sure, we'll read whatever verses you want.
Leviticus. Can you go to Leviticus 25:44 through 46?
Leviticus 25. What do you say? 44 through 46.
Yes.
So we got Leviticus, and we're going to use the NRSVUE. That's the academic Bible. That's what's used by academic standards. There you go. So we have in the NRSVUE, as for male and female slaves whom you may have, is for the nations around you that you may acquire male and female slaves. You may acquire them from among the aliens residing with you, from their families who are with you, who have been born in your land. They may be your property. You may keep them as possession for your children after you, for them to inherit as property. These you may treat as slaves, but as for your fellow Israelites, no one shall rule over with harshness. Now, obviously, it's a pretty good example. And what I will tell you is this, okay? One, American chattel slavery was a lot different from other historical forms of slavery.
No, I'm not
negating it, but what I'm telling you is that American chattel slavery was significantly worse than other types of slavery, with the exception of the Spartans and the Helots. Now, I will, with the exception of the Spartans and the Helots.
Owning a person, and this is just owning a person less bad.
Well, have you ever read Hammurabi's Code? You ever read Hammurabi's Code?
I mean, I have not read the entire Hammurabi's Code.
Hammurabi's Code notes that you cannot abuse your slaves. American chattel slavery had no such provisions. American chattel slavery, you could do whatever you want. There were state by state laws, like South Carolina said that, you could do anything you want. Virginia said, like, don't kill them, and like two other things. But obviously it was a mishmash, but the enforcement was very lax. But I will tell you this, is that Hammurabi's Code specifies that you cannot rape your slaves. You cannot, do bad, you cannot kill them. You cannot physically harm them beyond, a certain point. And this is, way back in ancient civilization. Slavery is a different institution, but I also say that this notes that the year of Jubilee provides a, kind of a counterweight to these verses, because, you're supposed to free all the slaves at the year of Jubilee.
No, it doesn't, because the year of Jubilee is only for the Israelite debt slaves.
And so, well, I will note this one very important thing about Christianity then. So you're making a note about Judaism, which would be fine. I'm not Jewish, but I will say this.
And who the Christians that ran the Atlantic slave trade, and all of the Christians in America that had slaves, what persuasion were they as far as their religiosity goes?
So, you want me to say Christian, but I will say this other thing.
You're Christian.
Now, you ever read Max Weber?
No.
So he talks about something called the Protestant work ethic, and there's something very different between Catholic and Protestant formulations in society. The fact of the matter is that because they have a progress-driven point of view, the Calvinistic Dutch, who ran most of the slave trade, had a very different view on human rights and human civilization. I will note that the slave trade was bad. We all know that the slave trade was bad. But I will note that the fact that, saying that the Bible supports everything is really just kind of sophistry. I will note that the Bible notes that all are welcome into the family of God. The New Testament notes that all are welcome into the family of God, and that Christians are to take up the mantle as the new nation of Israel. Therefore, slavery no longer permissible, because we are all members of the family of God.
That's not what anything in the New Testament says. There's nowhere in the New Testament that says slavery is no longer permissible.
No, but I will tell you this, is that if we look at the Old Testament and the New Testament, the Old Testament says it is not permissible to keep Hebrews as slaves. It is not permissible to keep the Israelites as slaves, right?
Right.
The New Testament declares that there is no longer a separation between Jews and Gentiles.
No, that's not what it says.
There is no Jew or Gentile.
It says like in the eyes of God, as far as like being judged by God or being accepted into Christianity, there are no lines. That does not mean that there are no slaves, or that there are no or that women are treated as equals to men. That's not what any of that means.
I would also, that's your interpretation, but I will say that extending
my interpretation. That's just reading the words off the page.
There's all sorts of things. You can, I can read a study about epigenetics, and it won't mean a thing because I'm interpreting it without, referencing it to any previous documents or studies or sources or things like that. I'm telling you,
read the words off of the page. You can't be wrong. I mean, sure, you could be wrong in your interpretation, but I don't think there's a lot of room for interpretation here.
Of course, there's room for interpretation. That's why that's why theology exists. But I will say,
just reading the words off of the page, just like Paul meant them to be read.
So I will note this, is that when there is no Jew or no Gentile before God, it says that. You can agree that it says that. And in Leviticus, it says you're not supposed to keep Hebrews as your slaves.
What's in the
why
New
then
Testament,
would you?
in the New Testament, what's the hierarchy? What's the hierarchy of the family in the New Testament?
Well, the hierarchy of the family is God is on top, and then some people would note the state. Some people would say the state, depending on what it is, depending on how you read Matthew, what you believe on just wars and things like that. The government would go in there, and then the pater familias, his wife and the family.
Right.
Yeah.
And so take like just with that right there, there's already a distinction. The father is placed above the mother above the children, and everything like that. And in your particular argument, you're saying, oh, none of that exists because you're all the same in the eyes of God.
No,
from
not at all.
God's perspective, in God's perspective, I can agree. Looking at it from 10,000 feet above it, it does look all pretty much equal and the same. But when you actually get down to it, there are still hierarchical systems in Christianity, including slavery, including the subjugation of women. So,
we have Exodus, which kidnaps the kidnapping and selling of a person. We have, was it 1 Timothy 1:8-10, slaves truly are brothers of the Lord. We do have this one thing that is very important, and it is that I'm not saying that the family structure was overthrown. What I'm saying is that there is no distinction, no longer a distinction with those who are outside the nation of Israel and those who are within the nation of Israel. I'm not saying that hierarchies were overthrown.
Which has nothing to do with keeping of slaves.
Except if you go into Leviticus, where it says you're not supposed to keep Hebrews as slaves. Hebrews were not supposed to be kept as slaves because they were considered part of the family of God.
The Christians are not Hebrews.
No. The Bible says, though, that birthright that was given to the Hebrew people is now shed. The blood of Christ is for all of the nations. And so all of them are now welcome into be what would be this chosen sect of people. Ergo, you are no longer permitted to keep your fellow man as slave. I mean, we have these other things, we obviously have that God, humans are made in the image of God. No man can possess a human soul. I think that's I don't even think that's an interpretation. No man can possess another human soul. I think everyone who is a Christian would agree with that. Slavery.
But in the Bible, you can definitely possess another human.
That was, the Bible doesn't really ever condone the system of slavery. The Bible deals, the Bible deals with the system. The Bible deals with the moral system that was in place at the time.
No, well, okay. So do you believe that the Bible is a reflection of God, like God's will and wants and his commandments?
The Bible is revelation to the people of Israel, mostly.
Okay.
In dealing with the world that surrounds them. He's not speaking. He's not speaking to them in a modern context. He's speaking to them in the ancient context because he's not speaking to modern people. He's speaking to the ancient Hebrews.
Oh, okay. But the first 4 commandments that he issues in his 10 commandments are all stroking his ego and giving very specific instructions on behaviors about how his people are supposed to behave. So why is it that telling people not to own another person is just beyond his capacity, but yet he can lump women in with other property? And he can very detailed tell the Israelites exactly how to build his temple.
Yeah, so we do have that. Well, I got to tell you that architecture wasn't that uncommon back then, while social liberation was. I mean, I think that's a pretty well recognized concept. My point. Well,
okay, well, I understand that, but my point is that you're portraying God as having or being sort of restricted to working in this ancient context, when there's a lot in the Old Testament where God is very specific about very minute things. And when I talk about the building of the temple, I'm not talking about architecture and things of that nature. Like, I know that was common then. What I'm talking about is how specific God is about these unnatural ways in which to worship him, and all of the specific ways that you're supposed to slaughter sheep and bulls and all this other stuff, and how you're supposed to burn their entrails and all that kind of stuff. He can command people to do very specific things, but he can't command people not to own another person. So
I'll note this: everything that is laid out in the Old Testament is not too abnormal for the society at the time. Other societies and other civilizations had ritualistic practices that were very particular. None of that would have been beyond the pale for the time. Even the very specific stuff about how to burn the entrails, we know with the Zoroastrians, we know with the other religions that existed out there, that they all had very specific customs and practices. Therefore, God ordering his own specific custom and practice is not that far out of the norm. I would note, though, what is out of the norm is monotheism. Monotheism is out of the norm. We have the first commandment, or the first 2 or 3 commandments, depending on, which version you use. But it's, I am the Lord your God. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images. That's the first commandment. Or the first 2.
I understand that, but you seem to be forgetting that the Israelites were not monotheistic.
Well, that's a very interesting debate, and they were monotheistic. They
were henotheistic. It's a difference.
I know there's a difference in henotheism and monotheism, but I will note that the ancient Hebrews were monotheistic, and it's because they placed a very high premium on what godhood is. If we were looking at this from a Hindu strain of what godhood is, absolutely they were monotheistic, or they were polytheistic.
Did the Israelites believe that other gods existed?
They believed that other spiritual beings existed, but none that had the absolute power of God. They believed that their enemies could call upon demons to perform tricks for them, but they didn't believe that these demons had absolute power. You had the king of Moab sacrificing his son to a demon, to get things from that demon, and he was obviously able to do that. And then, that's not that weird. Like, in regards to monotheistic religions, Islam has the jinns, Hebrew has, Kabbalism has its own thing, and Christianity has angels. This isn't a polytheistic or even a henotheistic mindset. It's monotheistic because we place the premium of godhood at the top, because God is at the top. So we place a very high premium on godhood. If you're taking a very low premium on godhood, then obviously it looks like monotheism or polytheism.
Well, it's just really interesting because monotheism wasn't a trend in the Mediterranean area until like the 1st century, like the second or first century BCE. So, monotheism just was not a trend at the time. And the fact that in the Old Testament and the Hebrew Bible in general, you have acknowledgments of other gods, calling them gods, not calling them other divine beings, calling them gods. So, it's fine to disagree, but you're disagreeing with the academic consensus.
I'm not necessarily disagreeing with the academic consensus because, I've taken classes about this at University of Michigan. This isn't, by the way, this isn't Moody Bible College. This is a place that's very, very skeptical of the Word of God, of the Bible. What I will tell you is this. We've talked a lot about, what the understanding of monotheism was back then, what the understanding of henotheism and other deities were. The issue is this. We have to know how the Hebrews interacted with the world around them, because the usage of the word God doesn't actually tell us that much because of a few grammar conventions that existed back then. We have no capitalization. There is nothing to differentiate what is lowercase God. Like if I refer to the Greek gods, I'm a Christian, but I can refer to the Greek gods, or a capital, all capitals or almost all capitals, the Lord. There's no distinction between that. What we do know is how the Hebrews acted. Did they build temples to other deities? They did not. They worshipped Yahweh only and exclusively, and they fought against other polytheistic civilizations.
I'm sorry, but I've been doing a Bible podcast for a few years now, and I specifically remember God fucking the Israelites up several times for building monuments to other gods, worshiping other gods, allowing other people to worship gods, fucking other people that worshipped other gods. So, I feel like everything you just said is contrary to what is actually.
So that's actually, that's a good point. But I will bring up in contrary to that is that the Hebrews, they built temples unto the Lord. And when they strayed, they were shown that this was a bad decision. They were shown that it was a bad decision. But that doesn't mean that Judaism at its core was polytheistic. You have Judaism very specifically rebuking polytheism there with those examples. The Hebrew people and Judaism are very closely aligned, but they're not perfect correlation. So you have the Hebrew people disobeying Judaism and then being punished for it. So I would note that the Judaic stream of thought was always monotheistic. The Hebrew people went all over the place. But
everything you just describes henotheism.
Not really, because the Hebrew Bible shows that worshiping and veneration of other gods is wrong, is bad, should not happen under any circumstances. And bad things will happen to you in your kingdom if you're functioning on a henotheistic or polytheistic basis. So you have pure Judaic thought being uncorrupted. The kings obviously are going to be corrupted. even the most saintly king will mess up, and we're showing that there are mess ups here, and they are not acting purely in accordance to Judaic law. I think they're making examples of them. I don't think that the Hebrew Bible is saying, I think it was Rehoboam, maybe it was Jeroboam, like whatever in the north of Israel, building these temples to other gods was great. That's why all this terrible stuff that happened to him and he was destroyed. I don't think that that's the example that it's providing. I think it's saying, worship God alone. That's what it's saying.
Right. Worship this one God above all other gods.
That's not really, this doesn't really contradict anything that I'm saying, though, because the actual existence of other gods, no, absolutely not. The Hebrew Bible is not talking about, a cosmology where other gods or other divine beings don't exist. It's saying all these things are demons, don't worship them. It's not denying that they, are real. It's not denying that they don't do things. It's saying that they're evil. It's a trap. Don't worship them. The Bible acknowledges other spiritual beings all the time. You have in the book of Job the talk of, Abaddon and death existing. Like they don't know where wisdom is. They can't find wisdom. There's an acknowledgement throughout the Bible of other divine beings. Some are fallen angels, some are angels, and there's only one God. And so you do have a structure where there are demons, and obviously these demons are going to look like gods to humans. If a flashing being comes out of the sky and tells you all these things, you're like, holy crap, that's God, something like that. Human minds can't really categorize divine beings. I don't think that the human brain can really comprehend.
But Job, but the book of Job and Ezekiel and all them, I mean, they were those were written much later in Israelite history. Like those were written closer to the common era than the books that we're talking about. Like
versions of that. Well, that's a really difficult question because we don't have the full textual lineage because papyrus doesn't survive that long. We do know, it doesn't. That's an issue, and that's it. I'll acknowledge that that's an issue, and we do have other things though, like the Tel Dan stele and other archaeological things that support a more biblical view of history. And then you have, the Tel Dan stele was pretty good for us Bible nerds right there. If you've looked at the Tel Dan stele, it corroborates the events of Kings. Now, obviously, I know you're going to say the Bible getting one battle right out of 10 doesn't mean anything. But it does include the fact about the Davidic house being on the throne of Israel, which is very important. But I will note this, is that we have a strong Job tradition existing beforehand, because we know we have this role of Satan as Hasatan, as the adversary. We have with Balaam's donkey too. We have this sort of thing, and you have this echoed in the Lord's Prayer. So, for example, lead us not into temptation in the Lord's Prayer is, calling back to do not put us to the test. Do not put us to the test, dear Lord. And so you have Satan, Hasatan, here as the adversary, as the tempter, as the one who tests. And then after the book of Job, you have his fall.
But all of that didn't start influencing Judaism until after the Jews had been exiled for 12 years into Babylon. That's when Zoroastrianism started to affect the Jewish people.
I have bad news about that for you. I have bad news for that about you. This is quite recent. You haven't been in school a while, so I'll forgive this for you. It was recently found out, and I was told this by one of my professors at UMich while I was doing a demonology class, is that the supposed Zoroastrian influence on Christianity and Judaism, other way around. The monks found all the Zoroastrian texts and just started copy pasting Christianity into it en masse. So we really have.
I would need to see again, some sources for that, because, and here's why I say because. For one thing, the burning hell that comes from Zoroastrianism, the adversary of Satan, or this cosmic adversary that's against the Savior deity, that's from Zoroastrianism. So all of those things existed in Zoroastrianism prior to Judaism being affected by it. And we know this because Ezekiel when Ezekiel talks about this valley of the dead where God breathes life into the skeleton
Oh no, that's
regrows
different.
and
That's
everything.
something that was in Jerusalem. That's the Valley of Ben Hinnom, which is where the pagans sacrificed their children. That's totally, regardless of what you believe about Zoroastrian, that's totally unrelated to Zoroastrianism. That had to
No,
do.
it's not. It's not unrelated to
Well,
Zoroastrianism
it had to do
because
with
that's the
local
first.
practices.
No, well, no, hold on. But that's when the first idea of this personal bodily resurrection first comes into it. It's when Ezekiel is writing 12 years after being in exile in Babylon, and Zoroastrianism was already teaching that kind of ideology by the time that the Jews got there. So, I mean, I'm not sure what your professor is.
Zoroastrianism doesn't work that way because Zoroastrianism is a dualistic belief. You know, it's very conflicted in that sense. You also have the other problem, which is Zoroastrianism didn't have the same kind of textual orthodoxy that Judaism had. These were very religions that were much in flux. I mean, I could bring you certain propositions from Philippine folk religions that, you know, look remarkably like Hinduism or something like that. You didn't have this strong orthodox religious tradition. I don't mean orthodox as in like Orthodox Christianity. I mean orthodox as textual orthodoxy. So I would say that the extent to which Zoroastrianism influenced Christianity or Judaism or vice versa, we cannot really say for certain, because here's the thing. You had, now I'm sure you will say, because this is more of the secular line of thinking, is that it was not all the Jews who were exiled in the Babylonian exile. It was the Jewish academics. It was the priestly class. It was the literate. If you follow that line of reasoning, if I flooded your country with 1,000 academics believing in a completely different school of thought, they would definitely influence the kind of theology or the kind of research papers that your institution produced by flooding it with 1,000 academics who believe completely different ways. Here's the other thing, though. You do not have a wide departure from Sheol and the Lake of Fire. The Lake of Fire has been a Jewish belief for a very long time. When it exactly entered the canon is not, there's no pinpoint as to say, you know, it came exactly here, right, in Zoroastrianism. We do know that the book of Daniel was the first mentioning of the resurrection of the dead. We will also note that, what was it? The Son of Man came to be introduced in the book of Daniel, you know, the figure that would become Christ. We also have,
those were written much later, and those were affected by these surrounding pagan religions.
I would really hesitate to say that because we don't actually have a textual lineage that would prove that. Because we don't have access to much of the Zoroastrian theology because of the Islamic invasions of the 600s. It's disingenuous to say we know that this idea came from the Zoroastrians because they were there at that time. That's circumstantial evidence at best. You know, just because I went somewhere at a certain time where something was going doesn't mean that I, immediately took that and I started thinking about that. It's not intellectually honest to say, well, we can trace it directly to this. It's saying that these two things were going on at the same time. They could be related. That would be the academically sound approach to that question.
No. Your approach, none of your approach has been academically sound in this entire thing, with the exception of mentioning some, vague journal articles about the proclivity of people to be.
It's just not a vague journal. I mean, they're doctors.
Psychopaths.
They're not like, no, they're not the doctors who said that, I don't know, vaccines cause autism. They're real doctors.
I understand that they're real doctors, but they're doctors of theology.
The psychopathy.
What you're talking about.
No, the psychopathy thing was not a doctor of theology.
The psychopathy thing. Okay.
Yeah,
No, I mean, I just like the things that you're saying concerning the religious history of the Jews. Like I feel comes from a really weird point of view. So I mean.
Well, I would just challenge you to say this. I would like you to produce some Zoroastrian texts in their purest form. I got a guy who is an atheist who reads these dead languages. I'm sure you do too. We can send them off. We can have them interpreted, but I would like some pure, unadulterated, because I can give you the Vulgate if I really want to. I can give you the Septuagint. I can give you all these other, I can give you the Teldan Stele. I can give you the Mesha Stele. I would really like to see a Zoroastrian stela or document. Obviously, I know it can't be papyrus unless it was stored in the desert somewhere really well, that actually validates these claims. I would like a validation of that claim if it is going to be pressed. Because just saying that two things were happening at the same time isn't a confirmation that they were the result of each other.
Okay, so just looking at my academic book that I get my information from.
Which one?
Apparently, the best treatments of this aspect of Zoroastrianism belief throughout. Well, it's not the impossible faith by Carrier. Belief throughout Western history is provided by Alan Siegel in Iranian views of the afterlife and ascent to the heaven, life after death, history of the afterlife in Western religion. That's pages 173 to 203. Albert de Jong, Traditions of the Magi, Zoroastrianism in Greek and Latin literature.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot of references here.
I think you would have to acknowledge, though, that belief in hell was not an exclusively Zoroastrian idea. I mean, it's
no.
really...
I didn't say belief in hell or belief in some kind of negative afterlife. I specifically mentioned the burning, like hell, fire kind of thing.
I don't really know if that's necessarily true because, you know, this kind of extreme heat or extreme cold, you know, is developing in Africa. I think it was Swahili mythology, Kazimu. You know, you have some sort of thing, you know, the Book of the Dead, you know, talks a little bit about an afterlife. You obviously have Hades, which talks about this afterlife. I don't remember what it's called. There's a cylindrical seal. What is it? Dumuzid, you know, being tortured in the underworld. It's a place of torture. It's a place of suffering. This was a common idea throughout ancient Sumeria. I think it's disingenuous to say that the Jews, you know, stole it from someone else. I mean, you have these kind of traditions going back to like the dynasties of Ur. And we know
I didn't say steal. I think they were syncretized. Like, I don't think that's stealing, though.
You know, this is, you know, I'm fine with that. I mean, that doesn't really make a difference in my faith because I believe that God revealed himself to every civilization in a different form. Personally, I believe now that the Messiah has come, that we all owe belief in fidelity to the Messiah, but we have several biblical stories that transcend cultures. For example, I know this is a bad example because I know you have lots of rebukes to it, but we're going to take it over a continent, is the flood fable, as you would refer to it, or as historians refer to. Fable doesn't mean false, it just means it's way back in the soup of history. But you have the flood fable, which, you know, exists in Judaism. And you're going to say, well, you know, this culture and this culture, that doesn't matter. What I'm going to give to you is a story from the Aztecs. You know, unless the Mormons are right, there's no way that it could have gotten over there. The Aztecs have a flood myth where a man named Noab, or Nota, goes on a giant boat provided by God and saves all the animals, and the flood specifically destroys the giants, just as Genesis 6 notes that the flood destroys the giants and the Nephilim. You know, you have this oddly, eerily similar story coming up in Aztec theology. How would the Aztecs get this remarkably similar story unless it was based on a common ancestral memory?
No, I mean...
how would that happen? I mean, that's a lot of similarities.
No. So you're telling me,
yeah,
that Noah over there in the Middle East got his boat together, right? And you know, got everybody on there, survived the flood and everything like that. And then, you know, obviously there's some genetic fuckery at play here with 8 people repopulating the entire world. But you're going to try to convince me that Noah's family made their way, I guess, back in time, because it obviously had to go back in time in order for, you know, the Aztec culture to build up to what it was in that area of the world. So Noah's family went back in time from when the flood occurred to settle in Central America. Hold on, settle in Central America in order to build up the civilization that they had, and they passed down this whole idea of Noah, which turned into Noab, and they built their whole flood myth fable after that. I mean, how hard is it? Like there's that explanation, or there's the explanation of, hey, floods occur. Hey, people build boats. Hey, people store animals on boats and transport them.
I would challenge you to find a flood that was powerful enough to sink the mountains of Mexico. You know, there has never been such a flood.
I don't think that the mountains of Mexico, like, I'm not
additionally,
sure
by the way, the Aztec
history of that area, but I mean, I don't think that the mountains of Mexico have been flooded, like as far as in the modern sense of the mountains of Mexico.
I would note this, is that you do have the Aztecs have this remarkably similar story. You know, the results of this being by chance are like teeny tiny. Now you mentioned the go back in time thing. The Aztec empire didn't really calcify until like the 1400s anyways, shortly before the arrival of the Spanish. You had cultural traditions before that, obviously, but I'm noting that there are cultural stories that can survive great cataclysmic events. There are cultural memories that can survive these sorts of things. There are cultural traditions and stories that can survive thousands of years. We know this because we have the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis has survived an incredibly long time. We have a lot of other books of the Bible that have survived this incredible length of history. And so I don't think the Aztecs, were so primitive where they couldn't keep track of things like these so intelligent Mesopotamians. I think they had this happen to them. They happened to write it down, and people continued transcribing it. I mean, you have this sort of thing. I mean, it goes very similar to the Hindu, the Puranas in Hindu mythology. I apologize for the butchering of that name. But you do have this existing as part of the Aztec canon. And the question I would ask you is, why? Why would they include the specific detail about the giants being destroyed by the flood? Why would there be a man and his family who are rescued by God because he's great? Why would there be all of these similarities that line up really remarkably well? I'm not saying there aren't differences. I mean, if I tell a story to 5 different people, I'll get 5 different but corroborating versions of the story. So why would all of these details naturally link up? And after this, we'll go back to morality. We've kind of driven off the rails now, but why? Why are all these similarities?
Well, so first off, when I was mentioning that Noah's family had to go back in time and travel all the way over to Central America, it's because we've known that Central America has been inhabited by Homo sapiens for since about 8,000 years ago, which seems to break your whole 6,000 year timeline. Which are you a creationist?
So I'm a 10 to 12,000 years guy. I'm not a 6,000 years guy. Yes, I am a creationist.
Okay. I'm not sure where you get the 12,000 years, but but when do you think the flood happened? Did the flood happen 6,000 years, or did it happen later than that?
We have the deluge being pretty early. We have to go before the development of certain parts of Egyptian civilization. We have this kind of mystery of the Sphinx. We don't really know when the Sphinx was built or by who. Some creationists, and you're going to laugh, but this is normal in my community. I'm sorry. A lot of people that I talk to believe that, it is very possible that the Sphinx were built by an antediluvian civilization. I mean, it has water damage on it. That's kind of weird. It's kind of weird that the Sphinx would have water damage on the top of it. So the Sphinx would have to be antediluvian. So we'd have to have the deluge being somewhat before or somewhat after the building of the Sphinx. And we don't really know how old the Sphinx are yet. We have this sort of radiocarbon dating, which is, carbon dating as a whole is unreliable. I mean, you have these margins of errors that are massive. You have these massive margins of errors of millions of years. So we don't really know. I mean, what they took a sample from like a living penguin, and it came up that it was 8,000 years old. So either we found, Methuselah the penguin, or, there's something a little bit messed up with the dating. Or you can't use it to date recent. Or you can't use what you would say. You can't use it to date recent things, and recent in archaeological terms is these millions and millions of years. And so, you can't.
I don't know why you say millions and millions of years like that. Like fucking radiometric dating doesn't work.
It's impossible for radiometric dating to be exact because we can't produce exact conditions of what the atmosphere was like supposedly 12 billion years ago. We don't know what the atmosphere was like back then. You can't reproduce in laboratory conditions how carbon or radiocarbon would interact with the environment. If we're setting it today,
that's not what you would use to date for millions of years.
No, I'm referring specifically to radiocarbon dating. I'm not referring to other types of carbon dating.
Right. And I'm referring to radioactive decay.
We're referring to different things then. And I think my previous
No, we're not. The radiocarbon dating is a type of radioactive dating. There are other types of radioactive dating, but they're all based on radioactive decay. And radioactive decay is well understood, and it's one of the most constant things in the universe. So, I don't think
right now really under the current conditions.
So your suggestion is either radiometric dating is so your suggestion is that physics fundamentally changed at some point in the past magically.
I would absolutely agree with that. I do think though that there is this kind of, now this is a thing that I have with other apologetic people, is that Christianity, we as the Christian religion, fundamentally, we're not necessarily compatible with this sort of relentless Western quest for humans to understand everything. God chose to reveal the absolute truth in the Levant. He chose to reveal this absolute truth to the people, the children of Israel, who had much different philosophical understandings of the world than we as Western humans do today. This desire by a lot of other people in the apologetics community, and atheists as well, to seek that humans must understand, humans must comprehend everything, is destructive. We need to acknowledge that there are certain things that exist that we do not understand. I challenge you to explain abiogenesis. Can you explain abiogenesis?
You mean abiogenesis?
Yeah, whatever. Abiogenesis, however we're pronouncing it. But you cannot explain the spontaneous occurrence of life. It's never even happened in laboratory conditions.
I mean, in laboratory conditions, we've been able to observe the building blocks of life.
You've gotten the nucleotides, but you haven't gotten them to shake hands with each other and say we're a being now.
I mean, I feel like you're being pedantically specific here.
Well, it's not pedantic. It's life and not life.
No. I know you are being pedantically specific, because with abiogenesis, we can understand the mechanisms that would have arisen, or not that would have arisen, but would have caused life to arise. We don't have to exactly reproduce life like in the lab in order to understand the natural processes or the most likely explanation for the appearance of life. I do want to go back to the Aztec flood myth real quick, because you brought that up. I didn't prepare for an Aztec kind of discussion tonight, but luckily artificial intelligence text generators work, and I did ask it some very basic questions. And
I'm glad to know that the big businesses are on your side, good sir.
Well, I'm just saying, like, I'm using Bard right now in case anybody wants to go and look it up. But Bard,
to please your Silicon Valley backers.
I don't have Silicon Valley.
I'm joking, but that's what they are.
So basically, currently what's understood about the Aztec flood myth is that it developed over time, and it's difficult to say when it originated, but it's likely to be influenced by earlier Mesoamerican flood myths, such as the Mayan flood myth. The Mayan flood myth tells a story of how gods destroyed the world with the flood after the people became too wicked. Only a few people survived, and they were able to repopulate the earth.
Hey, that sounds a lot like Genesis.
Right. Sure. The Aztec flood myth shares some similarities with the Maya flood myth. In both myths, the flood is caused by God's anger at people's wickedness.
Yeah. Same thing in Genesis.
However, there are also key differences between the two myths. For example, in the Aztec flood myth, the only survivors are a man and a woman who are warned of the flood by the god Tenochtitlan.
Tenochtitlan, something like that.
Yeah. They were able to survive by hiding in a hollow tree. The Aztec flood myth is likely to have developed in the centuries leading up to the Spanish conquest in 1521, but it is possible that the myth was influenced by the arrival of the Spanish, who also brought their own flood myth. But still, these very common attributes that you assign to it don't necessarily mean that there was like a worldwide flood and the knowledge of it was propagated by Noah and his family who inhabited the rest of the earth.
I would say that that's not necessarily correct, because you have a story that's very common throughout human civilization.
Right.
Your propensity is to say, hey, wait a minute, something might have happened.
It's easy to fabricate, everybody's being shitty. God flooded the world because everybody's being shitty. How are there still humans? Well, a few people survived and they fucked themselves silly and repopulated the earth. That makes total sense in my very primitive mindset.
That's a very weird
story to create.
Well, number one, we have to completely discard this idea that ancient people were some sort of like knuckle dragging primitives. They weren't. They were rational individuals just like you or I. The fact that they didn't have access to what we have doesn't mean that they were dumb. It means they existed with a different.
I feel like there's a pretty large gap in rationality between our mindset now, modern mindset, and the mindset of people in the 1400s or earlier than that.
I wouldn't necessarily say that's true. I say they existed in a different world with different sets of assumptions, different societal norms, and different understandings of how the world worked, based on their own observations and based on their own experiences. It is not my position to say that those experiences and what they observed as a result of things that they were doing, things that they could actually test that were happening, were invalid because they didn't understand the properties that surrounded them. I think that's a very dangerous slope. That leads into, that's a very Western mindset. It's very paternalistic in a sort of sense. These pasts were full of primitive people. This isn't true. The pasts were filled with normal people, just like you and I, that had different sets of societal functions. I mean, this is just, it's very weird to kind of say the past, these people were primitive. It's not accurate to say. And I must warn you this, so you don't use it in the future, is that is the mindset that empires use when coming into contact with primitive people, is saying, oh, these people are idiots because they don't know where this comes from. And, we need to teach them. The past wasn't filled with these. I know, but that's where that set of assumptions comes from.
I did not say that they were idiots. I said that they were incredibly gullible.
You said they were primitive.
Well, they're primitive compared to our understanding of reason and rationality now. Like,
maybe. I don't know. I think if I went to somebody in Plato's Academy and asked him to explain rationality, and I asked the average Joe on the street, I think the guy from Plato's Academy would do better. Even if I took an honors student from my Augusta University over here in philosophy and asked him to explain a concept, and I took somebody from Plato's school, I still think the guy from Plato's school might be a little bit more educated about it. I don't think that these people in the past were limited by anything else than their circumstances.
I think that the ability to reason was not as widespread, and so that results in the majority of the populace not being that educated to be in Plato's school. Like, do you think just like everyday people attended Plato's fucking
school? No, that's
school?
why I said it, that's why I changed it from a person on the street to somebody, here at the University of Michigan, or someone even at Harvard or Yale. I modified that because I knew that this would to mollify the complaint that I know you bring. Somebody actually commented something that I would agree with. And yeah, I would say that they were limited by their working body of knowledge. I wouldn't disagree with that assertion. I'm sorry to that commenter that I had to agree with them and ruin his evening. But by the way, somebody donated you $2 to buy a beer. So you're welcome.
Well, yeah, I got auto. Yeah. Oh, cool. The StreamYards has auto starring super chats now. Buy yourself a beer for enduring this crap.
Thank you. You should bring me on all the time. If you're going to get money all the time, you should bring me on all the time.
Thank you. Read between the lines. Let's shift away from this particular.
Let's go back to morality.
Yes, because that's what we were originally here to discuss. But getting on tangential topics. Now, are you? Let me ask you this question. In your particular version of Christianity, your theology, what is required of you to get into heaven?
What is required of a human to get into heaven? Well, we have obviously love the Lord your God. Obviously the first requirement is to be a Christian, and the second requirement is to let people know you are a Christian by your good works. I'm a Methodist. We are very service based in our religious thought. We believe in charities. The largest charity in the world is the United Methodist Committee on Relief. Following us are 3 Catholic charities, so I do have to give the Catholics some credit. Combined, their charities are more than ours, but still, the United Methodist Committee on Relief is the largest charity in the world. Methodists believe in putting our faith into action, as many Christians do. 70-something% of all charitable contributions in the United States come from churches. And so the church is a moral and societal backbone that helps keep the United States together. Obviously, there are bad people within the church. There are bad things that happen within the church. But I think it's undeniable to say that without the church in the United States, we would have a much bigger problem with homelessness and poverty and addiction than we currently do. Just look, I mean, if you took away 70% of the charity, you're going to have a problem. You're going to have a problem in society.
No, I mean, if you take away 70% of the charity and don't replace it with something else, then yeah, sure, you would have a problem. But you're automatically assuming that if you take away like church, like religious charities, that there wouldn't be some other like thing to fill in that funding gap.
Theoretically, it would have happened already, because the United Methodist Committee on Relief wouldn't be the largest charity in the world if secularized Europe had started building itself, all these new charities. We're not seeing that. Why aren't we seeing that? Why aren't we seeing these these post-Christian societies developing their own charitable networks compatible with this? And I would also note this to a bigger
there
point.
are. I mean, there are non-religious charities out there, and I mean, just because I guess your particular charity or a Methodist charity, it just so happens to be the largest right now, does not mean that atheist charities should have already overtaken it. Like,
no, I'm saying
that's ridiculous.
We're not seeing a lot of atheist committees on relief on the ground here when we have hurricanes.
But no. Well, for one thing, you're being specific to atheists, and I'm just saying like secular or non-religious.
Well, secular is different because you have a litany of people that make up a secular institution. Not all of these people are going to be atheists, and they're going to be motivated by a variety of factors. It is not for us to say what those factors are.
If you take away the church charities, then you would then there would be secular, non-religious, atheist charities that would fill the void. And you just speculating. Hold on, you just speculating that there should already be atheist charities when atheists and non-religious people make up the smaller portion of the population in some of the most populated parts of the world. I feel like you're just putting unreasonable expectations on the demographic.
I'll accept that argument, but I wouldn't say that secular charities are synonymous with atheistic charities, because I would say
I didn't say they were.
No, I know, but I would like to clear that off. Is that if a secular charity does good works, that's a good thing. And I'm not going to say that everyone in a secular charity is an atheist, because I know that's not true. I've met people in nonprofits. Some of them are atheists, some of them are Christians, some of them are a variety of other things. And so, I'm arguing. My initial point was to say, if you just yoinked away the Christian church right now, there would be a very large issue in the American charitable giving space. What I would,
I mean, you're proposing an impossible situation of ripping away these charities and then just stopping time at that particular point.
No, I'm saying that
there's a problem.
Well, no, it was a hypothetical that we got into the weeds. Now, I'm just noting that it is important. The contribution that Christian charities currently make to the charitable structure is incredibly important. I don't think.
Anyways, that's not where I was going with this.
Okay,
I don't know how we got onto this. So you believe in faith and works?
Well, I'm fine with that characterization, because I'm not debating a Catholic or a Lutheran or anything like that. I'm fine with that characterization for right now, even though it's not entirely accurate. But I'll let you go on.
Okay, well, what would be entirely accurate?
Well, faith and good works is one way of putting it, but that could be construed as that faith and good works are part of our salvation. What is necessary for salvation is a belief in Christ. And then our faith is known by our works. That would be the characterization. But you can say faith and works. That's fine.
Oh, okay. So you're going to play a straw man fallacy. Not a straw man.
It's not a straw man fallacy. No true Scotsman is what you're looking for. Oh, I thought you were looking for a no true Scotsman. No, what I'm saying is that we as Christians ought to be known by our good works.
Okay.
There are people who fulfill it. I mean, like Teresa of Calcutta, for example. St. Teresa of Calcutta.
Hey, you know what Christians are also known for?
Unfortunately, a lot of things.
Systematic pedophilia.
So it's the public school system.
I would.
To see. This isn't about. By the way, for my good friends listening out there, this is not about the whole recent conservative panic with the school system. This is not the whole reason. This is an ongoing trend in the public school system committed by people who are gay, straight, whatever. It doesn't matter. Their sexual orientation doesn't matter. Their whatever proclivities don't matter. We do have a systematic problem in the public school system with pedophilia.
Oh, so can you name an instance where a teacher has sexually molested or raped or harassed a child, and instead of them getting fired or put in jail, they are just shipped off to a different school so that they can continue to offend children?
I can pull up some articles. I didn't come prepared with this, so I can look up this, but We have
well, my point is that I have not yet heard of school systems shipping teachers around that rape their children.
I mean, media
and
attention to a problem doesn't determine how severe a problem is.
No, I mean, it's not about media attention. It's just about the sheer number of like court cases filed against like entire parishes, multiple different church communities throughout the entire world. I mean, there's been so many different commissions and investigations into, most notably the Catholic Church, which I know you're not Catholic.
So I would note that. Okay, go on.
But also like the what was it, the SBC, Southern
Baptist Convention
recently had their own particular kerfluffle with it too, showing systematic abuse of children and people in general in their congregations. So I mean, this is like, I get that maybe you could find one or two examples of maybe a
so we actually, I have a researcher from Hofstra University, Cheryl Shakeshaft, looked into the problem of the public school system versus the Catholic Church. And she noted, if you think the problem in the Catholic Church is bad, the physical abuse of students is more than 100 times likely than abuse by a priest. So I just want you to, 100 times. And this is a researcher at Hofstra. This isn't, again, this isn't somebody from Liberty. This isn't somebody from Bob Jones. This is Hofstra. And, you can say that media attention, is the determiner, but
that's an
media attention
is popularity.
No, media, I mean, it's just more popular to hear about a Catholic priest abusing people than it is a public school teacher. I mean,
No, it's not. I hear constantly on the news about, a teacher being inappropriate with a student or anything like that. So it's not about media attention.
I guess we're just a different media stream because I've never heard that. Ever.
What?
I've never heard.
Anyways, that's not where I was going with this. I was not going this direction with it. All I was trying to figure out is if you're a Methodist and a Christian, can you still go to hell?
Of course I can still go to hell.
So why is that? Is it how can you be a Christian and be Methodist and everything like that and still go to hell?
Well, if I profess that I am a Christian, but my works do not reflect a Christ-like mindset, they will tell that my faith is impure, as they do for any individual.
No true Scotsman.
No, that's not a no true Scotsman, because it's not humans being the judge. Humans aren't the judge. God's the judge. It's impossible to know someone's true faith just by looking at them. It's impossible to know someone's true faith just by reading about them or judging them. It is not for us humans to be the final arbiter of the immortal soul. It's not a no true Scotsman, because I'm not saying I'm the judge. I'm not saying that, I'm determining who's a Christian and who's not a Christian. I'm saying that I don't know. All I can do is take people at their word. All I can do is look at what people are doing in the world, see how they affect the world, and if that reflects a Christ-like mindset. I cannot say who is a Christian and who is outside of Christianity. What I will say is this: we will know in the end because God knows. Only God knows what is truly inclined upon the human heart. What we have truly done, what is done in the dark, shall be brought to the light. Only God knows. I don't know. I can't say.
What would you say about a person, let's say in your congregation, that was caught, raping a small child, and they claim to have repented? What would you do?
There is this whole argument about if there are sins that are unforgivable. And what I would note is, obviously, the interpretations vary on this, but I would go back to the millstone. It is better for a millstone to be tied around your neck than for you to cause one of these little children into error. Or brought into scandal, if we're going to use original translations. And so you have harmed that child. You have brought him into scandal. You have brought him into the scandal, which is your sexual abuse. And at that point, I think, millstones may apply. Absolutely, if somebody in the church or in the public school system or anywhere else is caught being inappropriate for children, regardless of whether they say they repented or not, they are a danger to society and ought to be expelled from polite society in the form of jail time. If that person wants to repent and be right with God, they can do that from behind prison bars just as well they can do from behind of it. Personally, as a Methodist, I cannot say I believe in the death penalty. I do not believe that it is within the human realm to extinguish human life. But I do agree with isolating pedophilic elements from society. And I believe that there is a nationwide issue of child sex abuse. If you think it's just the Catholic Church, if you think it's just the public school, come and look, at any other position of power. Look at politics. No, not the Democratic Party, the Republican Party. You look at society and it's infested by these systems of abuse, these systems of oppression and systematic exploitation.
Yeah, I never meant to make it sound like I think that it only happened in the Catholic Church. But my question is do you think that person would go to heaven? Like, let's just assume that they repented and they truly repented. Do they still go to heaven?
That is for God to decide. And my answer that I lean towards is no, absolutely not. Because what we have here is a case of child abuse is the worst thing you can do to a child. It is arguably, in many instances, worse than murder. Because you're forcing someone to relive this hellish trauma every day for the rest of their life. And it oftentimes drives many people to suicide. We have this action, this reprehensible action, that is so evil that it may imply someone is incapable of repentance in a pure way. Because to cause this kind of suffering, one has to have something with them that is incredibly wrong, something that is inhuman, I would argue. Some theologians argue that people who abuse children have in many senses forfeited their sense of humanity by inflicting this pain upon a child. And I would tend to agree with that. I do not think that pedophiles are capable of pure belief. I do not believe that. Absolutely not.
Well, what do you mean by pure belief? I guess just like actual belief in God, or
pure belief is, I mean, unadulterated belief is what I mean by pure belief, which is belief that is not like situation. Like, obviously they can go up in, some cases in Catholic and other churches they do, and they say, oh, well, I'm forgiven. I ask God to forgive me. And I think that 99% of the time, actually 100% of the time, that's just a cover up to keep acting within the institution. But, that's obviously exists. You have it in politics. You have it with Dennis Hastert. You even have it within the satanic community. You had Colonel Michael Aquino. I don't know if you know anything about Michael Aquino, but Colonel Michael Aquino, a very prominent Satanist who married, I think he founded the Temple of Set, and he married, who's the famous Satanist? You're probably going to know his name. Like the old-timey one. Not Lucian Grace.
And
Anton LaVey. Yeah. He married Anton LaVey's daughter. He's very heavily involved in the satanic community. He kind of just disappeared. But Colonel Michael Aquino, we have evidence that he was involved in a large reaching child sex ring. Personally, and this is where you're really going to disagree with me, if I was to say anything about the 90s and the satanic panic, I would say, if anything, it was rightly intentioned but wrong focused. I don't think D&D was causing people to believe in Satan. But do I believe that preschool where the children were interrogated and they said that all the teachers were abusing them, then it was written off by the courts? I think that was probably legitimate. I think we should tend to trust the children when they're talking about cases of child abuse. And so, to say, I don't think this is just a Catholic problem or even a Christian problem or a public school problem. It is a societal problem. It is societal sickness within humanity, which once again, we can stem back to the fall of humanity from God's perfect vision. And that's, the explanation for sin in the world. And, to say it's just Catholic or anything else. I know you didn't say it was just Catholic or even say it's just Christian. We have it in every segment of society, all the way from the Satanist communities to the people who proclaim to be devout Catholics. The difference is, this is the difference. In the Catholic Church, not in the Catholic Church, but in Christian communities, these kind of actions are viewed by the Bible and other, religious authorities as morally reprehensible. And most sane congregants and churchgoers would absolutely be in favor of total expulsion and, maybe even the death penalty for these people. However, in the satanic community, in the Temple of Set, what they do to Michael Aquino? They did absolutely nothing to him. And he is a child sex trafficker. This kind of thing was awarded in the satanic community. and hidden in Christian communities where they know it's wrong. So that's what I would say about this whole thing is, across the board. You got another $10. I'm really a moneymaker for you.
So, I mean, I don't know anything about the history of that particular instance with the Satanic Temple or the Satanic Institute. I don't think that was the Satanic Temple.
No, it was the Temple of Set.
Okay,
but it was LaVey's daughter who helped found it.
Right, I get you. I feel like that's very different from the Satanists that exist now. But
maybe it is, maybe it isn't. We don't know their connections.
Well, I mean, my only point with all of that is because you talked about justice. Like the only way to get justice is through Christianity, because God, punishes people after they die. But it seems to me like a lot of Christian theology, most namely like evangelical Christians and whatnot, they say that all you got to do is believe in Jesus in order to get into heaven, and that kind of washes away any kind of justice that you could hope to get. So,
allow me to lead you. This will be a very short aside. You don't even have to respond to it if you find it too ridiculous. But what I will tell you is that American Christianity has been very negatively influenced by the institution of capitalism. American capitalism has influenced Christianity to such an extent that it is a major concern for me. It is something that I think about every day, is that the religion of consumerism, by and large, has consumed many elements of the Christian church. Jesus himself, which I don't know if you acknowledge that Jesus was a real historical person, but even Bart Ehrman does, but Jesus was a real historical person. And, regardless of whether you believe in God, I don't think you believe in God, given your name, but we have Jesus teaching here, being for the poor, being for the downtrodden, being for the mourning, being for the poor in spirit. And you have him overthrowing the money changers in the temple, saying they were making a mockery. You have Judaism. Michael Aquino referred to himself as a Satanist. Okay, I'm sorry. But that was just a comment that flashed up out there. But you have Christianity in many ways being subservient, and some evangelical denominations are really susceptible to this, to the god of capitalism, actually a demon, Mammon, more than they are to Christ himself. What does the Bible say? The Bible says it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for the rich man to enter the kingdom of God. But you have, down the generations, had Christianity so perverted by these capitalist thinkers that we no longer, in many cases, have this pure Christianity of Christ. We have people talking about, money. That is not a Christian thought, in my opinion. So I think that many Christian dogmas have been watered down. I think you would agree that there are bad atheists, and I can agree that there are bad Christians. But what I would disagree on is that the following of right teaching and right gospel. That's what we would disagree on.
Okay.
I said you didn't have to respond. Ridiculous.
Right.
Capitalism, not good for Christianity.
I mean, I can agree that unfettered capitalism in any kind of respect is bad. But in any case, one thing that I want to touch on, and then we can go, because it has been about an hour, almost an hour and a half.
Sure.
So one thing that I have a problem with is this whole idea of God being the moral lawgiver.
Okay. God being the moral lawgiver.
Right. And so, because I see a lot of things that you would call immoral being done by God, and it kind of seems like religious people just give God a pass.
Now you're mostly going to be talking about the Old Testament, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's the Old Testament. There's some stuff in the New Testament.
What would you say in the New Testament? Like, for argument's sake, let's say I'm a Gnostic. Let's say I'm a Gnostic, for argument's sake. I'm not a Gnostic, but let's say for argument's sake that I'm a Gnostic Christian. And so I throw out the Old Testament. What would your explanation be to a Gnostic? Yes, this is what some Gnostics believe. Not all Gnostics. I'm sure someone in the comments is going to correct me that this sect of Gnosticism doesn't believe that. But there are sects of Gnosticism who just completely throw out the Old Testament. How would you argue with somebody who is a Gnostic believer in God, saying that God's the moral lawgiver, here's the New Testament, nothing else?
Well, I mean, first off, I would disagree about throwing out the Old Testament. Jesus says in the New Testament that, that God, which was him, is the same in the past as he is right now in the present and in the future. So the Jesus or the God of the New Testament is the same Jesus, or is the same God of the Old Testament. So any of the atrocities done in the Old Testament by the same God of the New Testament is definitely of warrant to mention. Just because God sort of chilled his ass out in the New Testament doesn't detract from the atrocities that he commits in the Old Testament. But as far as like in the New Testament, what I might suggest is, the parts where Jesus, shits on that woman,
Oh,
calling
you're
her a
referring to
dog
the,
and everything.
yeah. Well, he doesn't call her a dog. There's a lot of theological exegesis, not eisegesis, exegesis about that particular um, part in the Bible. And the fact of the matter is that Jesus wanted a proclamation of faith from that woman, and he awarded her. By the way, in the end, he awarded her everything she wanted. He didn't say, "No, you're a dog. Now now I'm not going to do anything for you." Jesus is just as harsh with the Hebrews as he was with the woman. I think was that in Tyre, but he was just as harsh with that woman as he was with Jews. When it was Jews who are coming to him and saying, save my daughter, and he's like, you have no faith. I'm not going to help you. He says that to the Jews. There is no sort of mutual, there's no sort of exclusive treatment where Jesus treats the Jews so much better than he's treating these outsiders. He wants proclamations of faith so that he knows that they believe, and so that through their belief he can perform these miracles. So he treats that woman poorly, yeah, but look at the way, he talks about the weeping and the gnashing of teeth. He talks about that. He tells the rich young ruler, who is by some traditional sources, a Sadducee, not a Pharisee, a Sadducee, and he tells him, give up everything you own, give all your money to the poor, why don't you do all that, and then you can truly believe in me. So Jesus has a very constant treatment of pick up your torch and follow me. Be good, give to the poor, live humbly, and follow me. His proclamation to that woman is the same as it is to the rich young ruler, which is...
He also said, follow the laws of Moses, did he not?
Yeah, he said that, there is this whole thing about the laws that he has not overturned or he fulfilled. Now, there's a whole argument between the moral law and I forget what it's called, but there's some sort of moral law and traditional law, and there's this whole thing about that to distinguish the Jews as the messianic people. And this is very prominent in rabbinical studies and halakhic rulings. We also have to remember that the Jewish texts of the Old Testament, Christians often have a hard time defending the Old Testament because by and large, Christians don't use the Mishnahs or the commentaries by the rabbis on the actual implementation of the law. So if we look at the implementation of the laws of the Old Testament by halakhic courts, the implementation of the law is you also have to set standards for when the law can be enforced. The Old Testament is a lot of times mute on when the laws can be enforced. Like the adultery put adulterers to death thing, right? You're familiar with that? The way that very faithful first century Jews in halakhic courts put that into practice is you needed this standard of evidence, you needed this proof, you needed witnesses, you needed to submit all this stuff. And a halakhic court that submitted one death penalty every 7 years was considered bloody by the standards of first century Judea. So you have this thing called standards of proof, and it's because these are God's pure laws. The Torah is God's pure laws. If we are to enforce God's pure laws, we can't just strain them through the one-layered strainer of human judgment, because human judgment is inherently fallible. You have to strain it through all these procedures and judgments and second judgments, because we need to make sure that the implementation of God's law is right, because God makes some pretty bad pronunciations for people who immorally or loosely enforce the law. And so you had a very high standard of law enforcement by first century Jews.
What would you say if I told you that God was fine with child sacrifice?
God's not fine with child sacrifice. What you're gonna reference is the story of Abraham and Isaac.
No.
What were you gonna reference? I'm actually curious to know.
There's a couple of stories I could reference. The first one coming up in my head is Jephthah.
Can you give me the chapter and verse for that?
I believe it's in Judges. Jephthah was a judge. It's Jephthah's daughter. Judges 11.
So I'd have to get more context on this story, but I will also note that the Bible is not the Bible in many places chronicles what happened, and is not necessarily saying, you know, all these things that happened were good and right. The Bible chronicles many things that happened that were bad.
Okay, so let me just give you, given what you just said right there, let me just give you a quick Cliff's Notes about the Jephthah's daughter thing. Sure. So Jephthah prays to God and promises God, and all this is from like
if he achieves victory over the Ammonites, not the fossils, the people, that, you know, he would, what was it, sacrifice. Now there's actually an interesting thing about the word sacrifice. Okay, do you know the phrase to offer the body as a living sacrifice, which occurs a few times in the Bible?
Let's not get into a pedantic thing.
Well, it's not pedantic.
Exactly. It is pedantic because the story is obviously the story is obviously about Jephthah burning his daughter to death, or he killed his daughter and then burned her body.
Or what else? What else?
It's
what else?
Child sacrifice.
What's the other thing? Because let me tell you, Elkanah's wife, Hannah, what does she say? She says, God, if you give me a son, I will sacrifice him to you. We know that she didn't kill him because he's the prophet Samuel. So we have this sort of fungible definition of the word sacrifice. So did he send his daughter to an ancient Jewish convent, or did he burn her at the stake? The Bible would have noted if he burned her. The Bible notes, you know, the Bible, one thing, offers a lot of details on various things. It does not say anywhere that, you know, he hauled her up to the burning table and they burned her and they ripped out her heart and did all these other things like that. It doesn't say that. And so we do have every other part of the Bible saying, hey, human sacrifice is bad. Look at Jezebel. Look at the servants of Baal. They're all evil. Don't do that. I don't think that this is a valid comparison, because you have sacrifice. You have sacrifice used similarly by some interpretations of the book of Samuel about Hannah. And you have... well,
we're not talking about the book of Samuel. We're not talking about any of the books. We're talking about Judges.
We're looking at the definition of the word sacrifice.
That he sacrificed his daughter as a burnt offering. How else can you interpret that? How else do you interpret burnt fucking offering?
I would have to say, you know, when they have the word burnt offering, and I'm not seeing that where I'm looking, but I'm going to look harder.
Okay, well then look in verse 31, Judges 11:31. Whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering.
You know, let's look at the NRS. I have to really dig into the Greek and the Hebrew on this one, because we have different... Well, I mean, let's be honest here, is that we're reading a translation. I always go back to the other textual traditions when I'm reading it. I mean, it's true. I mean, look at Isaiah. It's very important to use that. But we have some versions that say burnt offering. We have some versions that don't say burnt offering. I'd be very interested to see the halakhic commentary on this. But I'll also note this. If he did offer his daughter as a burnt offering, what do we learn from that story? Do we learn that Jephthah is a good person?
I mean,
no.
I feel like we learn that God is a shitty person, if he is a person at all.
Well, no, you're presuming a sort of Calvinistic God where he's determined everything that's going to happen beforehand.
No, I haven't. So it's not that God has determined everything that's happened, but it is this idea that God is omniscient. He's all-knowing, so he knows past, present, and future.
Yeah, he's not going to stop. He's not going to stop human will. He's not going to stop.
Hold on. God could have not made that pinky swear with Jephthah. Jephthah was down there and it was like, hey, if you help me destroy these Ammonites, I'll sacrifice anything as burnt offering, that the first thing that comes out of my house. And God knew at that point that his daughter was going to be the first one to come out of his house. And God still made that pinky swear. God could have been like, nah, man, how about we pick something else?
We don't have
you rub one out for me?
We don't have a response. We don't have a response from God here where he says, you know, yeah, you got to stick to that.
There is a response from God. Jephthah was successful over the Ammonites because of God's being with him, because God granted him that.
Let's see here. Jephthah,
that was the only reason why he was successful over the Ammonites.
Gilead. Let's see. We're going to go over here. So trusted Israel not to pass the coast, but Sion gave his father and Testament. A lot of names here. Give me 1 second. They will not pass that which Chemosh gave God to possess. So whenever the Lord our God shall drive before us and possess, Israel dwelt in Heshbon. Oh boy. Gilead. Give me a second. I gotta read the whole thing. Whosoever come forth the door's house to meet me. There we go. I return in peace from the children of Ammon. Shall surely be the Lord's. I will offer a peace offering. So Jephthah passed to the children of Ammon to fight against the Lord. Delivered them unto his hands, and he smote them from Arior even till the cometh in Minnith, even 20 cities at the plain of Jephthah. All right, I'm almost there. And became with a rent his clothes. At last, my daughter down. Actually, it's actually quite interesting here because you're familiar with the story of Abraham, right?
Yes.
So there is obviously the traditional understanding of the story. And then, of course, I don't know if you've ever read, was it Fear and Trembling by Soren Kierkegaard? I'm assuming you're not a fan of Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard writes that the willingness of Abraham to sacrifice Isaac is not actually a profession of faith. Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Isaac is irresponsibility, because a child is not a commodity. A child was given to a family by God, and therefore it is not that parent's thing to give up for God. So Kierkegaard goes on to write that Abraham actually failed the test. Abraham failed the test because he believed Isaac's was his to give in the first place. Jephthah learned this lesson the hard way. He made a promise that was insane, and he wrought what he sown in this particular case. He wrought it, and it serves as a cautionary tale to other people. In fact, Christ echoes it: "Do not put your Lord God to the test."
So listen. So if I go to Genesis, the sacrifice of Isaac.
Yeah.
It said in what is this, 22, Genesis 22, starting at 15, it says, "And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore, and your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies," blah, 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 blah. So basically, that's God telling Abraham, hey, you're willing to stab a motherfucker that I gave you. That is a sign of faith, and now I will multiply your offspring as numerous as the stars, and blah blah blah. Like, he's saying, I'm blessing you for following me blindly.
So Kierkegaard's explanation goes on that because Abraham already had had basically committed himself to a monotheistic existence already.
So disregard what the Bible says in favor of what Kierkegaard says. Is that
well? No, it's not really disregarding at all. It's, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and numerous as the sands on the seashore. Your descendants.
Right. If he failed, why is God blessing him?
God blesses failures all the time. I mean, that's not.
It doesn't say he failed. Like, what I'm saying is that if God has it in his mindset that he failed, why does it seem like, for one thing, he doesn't say that he failed. He actually insinuates that he succeeded. Mm-hmm. And two, he blesses him for doing the thing that God wanted him to do. God specifically asked him to go and do that.
Yeah. And so obviously there's a lot of debate to be had around that. The argument could be made, though, and it still has compellingly been made by Kierkegaard. I encourage people to read Fear and Trembling about Abraham's failure of the test. I mean, there's something to be said for willingness, and there's something to be said for actually going and doing it. And the fact of the matter is that the child was given to him by God, and therefore was not his to give in the first place. Why does God bless him then? Well, we have, I think it was Isaac. Was it Isaac who then had the son that was really hairy, and then the son that wasn't hairy, Jacob and Esau? We have a blessing. We have a blessing similarly delivered under fallacious pretenses. This isn't an unusual thing for the Bible, for God to deliver blessings onto those who are unworthy. Jacob receives the blessing despite being unworthy from Isaac.
It doesn't say that he's unworthy.
No, but it was not his that he was entitled to. He was not entitled to the birthright.
Okay, I mean, we can just disregard
as the
what the words
firstborn.
are on the page.
No. As the firstborn, Esau, by traditional, Hebrew law, would have been entitled to the birthright. And in fact, Isaac declares that it was his intention to give the birthright to Esau, but he doesn't. He gives it to Jacob.
Okay, but still, Judges 11, Jephthah's daughter, God knew that Jephthah was going to have to sacrifice his daughter. Instead of proposing some kind of alternative thing, God goes ahead and he gives him victory over the Ammonites, and then watches as Jephthah burns his daughter alive, or sacrifices his daughter as a burnt offering. Whether that's, he slaughters her like a lamb, or he burns her alive, we don't really know, but he ends up burning her to ash.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so I feel like that points to God being a pretty shitty person.
Not really. I mean, do not put your Lord God to the test. It very clearly says that in the Bible.
He wasn't putting God to the test. Where's the test in that? He was like, help me defeat them. That's not a test. Yeah. It's not, hey,
no. It was, I will profess
them and I'll believe.
No. I will profess sincere dedication to you, Lord, if you do this for me. That is a quid pro quo.
Yeah. No. If you do this for me, I will sacrifice the first thing to come out of my house. Like, that's not like a test.
That is a declaration of belief based on God doing something for you. Because if God,
test.
No, he's making
a declaration of belief.
He's making a bargain with God. He's trying to make a bargain with God.
He already tried. Well, I mean, yeah, but I mean, there's been plenty of people to do bargains with God.
He's making a bargain with God. That's not right. That is not right. You do not make bargains with God.
No, that's not true. Throughout Genesis, God makes many bargains.
Well, you have people trying to make bargains with God. God just goes and does what he wants to do anyways, though. Anyway, excuse me.
Anyways, another instance, if we could shift to another instance of child sacrifice. It's not child sacrifice in the same kind of way, but it's just child murder. You've got Numbers 31, verses 17 to 18, where God has the Israelites kill every person, man, woman, and child, except for the virgin girls, and has the Israelites force those virgin girls into sexual slavery. Now, there's the murder of the innocents in that don't make a lot of sense if God is the moral lawgiver of everything. And there's also the forcing of child sex slavery that also kind of invalidates God as a moral lawgiver.
So, taking the case of the Midianites, there's a lot of argument about that. If we're going to function in the young earth creationist spectrum here, we don't really know what the Midianites were. Some young earth creationists would even contend that the Midianites weren't human. They were sort of descendants of these other fallen beings. Because there's this whole thing in the apocryphal book of Enoch, about
let's just go ahead and assume that they were not alien babies.
Well, I'm not comfortable, taking that assumption with what they were, because, I'd like to see, more evidence about what that is. We do have these sorts of things here, but I would talk about, if we're going into something like the Book of Enoch, which the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo takes as canon, we would have just cause to believe that these could have been a race of demons, quite frankly. And so driving them out would have obviously been the correct thing to do. We know that in the modern context, too, that a whole
my wife brings up an interesting point here. If these Midianites were demons, why did the Israelites keep the young virgin demons?
Well, we know
marry and propagate with.
Well, actually, we have this being quite a common theme, because in Genesis we know that the demons, the fallen angels, copulated with humans, anyways. So that's just what we have to take.
Why would God order the Israelites to fuck demons?
Well, they already had, and so I'm not really, I can't necessarily.
That's not an explanation for why God would order his people to fuck demons.
No, it's not. I'm completely content saying that, but we also have to look at what is the fruit born from Christianity. What is the fruit born from Christianity? What has happened in Christian civilizations? I will note
I don't think that matters at this point.
Well, it does actually, because Christian
No,
civilizations have produced the best.
We're talking about Numbers 31.
Yeah.
We're talking about what God specifically ordered,
Yeah.
and God and the Midianites. As far as the text goes, there's no mention of demons or demonics or anything like that for the Midianites. The Midianites.
No, there isn't. But we know that demons existed on the earth at that time. We know.
No,
that demons
we
existed.
do not
yes, we
know
do.
that.
Yes, we do.
No,
well, if we're taking it from the biblical perspective, we absolutely do. Of course,
demons did not exist at this point in time in the Bible.
No, that's not true. Demons have existed throughout all of history in the Bible. But I would also say that we can judge Christian civilization, and we can judge Judaic civilization, this Judeo-Christian history, based on the civilizations that it produced. And if, you'd have a much sounder argument if these civilizations that were produced were these, horrible, monstrous civilizations that sacrifice children all the time. But we look at the Western judicial system and the legal canon produced around it, and we have the basis for justice and all those things that have existed around the world. We have here that is developed from the Christian tradition, the most fair legal system that has ever existed. Why would Christianity, if Christianity was defined, if Christianity,
is an entire organization dedicated to freeing wrongly convicted people, if this is the best judicial system out there?
Well, I'd ask the Uyghurs. I'd ask about their trials, because I'm not saying our legal system's perfect. What I'm telling you is that Christian civilization has produced the most superb iteration of civilization to ever exist.
Everything about America is antithetical to the Bible. As far as like the government goes, it's antithetical to the stuff listed out in the Bible. Yes, every single part
that's a very weak argument.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is, because the founders, the framers.
Listen, I'm talking. The every single part of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are antithetical to the Bible. You can't get around that. Free speech, antithetical to the concepts contained in the Bible. Freedom of the press, antithetical to the concepts contained in the Bible. Freedom of religion, antithetical. And this is just the First Amendment to the Constitution. Antithetical to the Bible and everything contained within it. You know what is the number one thing in the Old Testament that God persecuted his own people for?
Is the worship of demons, obviously.
The worship of other gods.
Demons. Kamosh, demons. Baal, demons.
Gods.
And so what I would note is that we have here, this sort of critique of American civilization, of the American experiment. I would note that our founding document does begin with all humans are endowed by their creator. I'm not sure who that is in this context. I can presume it's the Christian God, to the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is definitely
in
Genesis. In Genesis, we have the fact that the breath of life is in all humans. We have the fact that humans are made in the image of God. That's
not a fact.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
This is a. Well, now I'm speaking. I try not to interrupt you. Grant me the same courtesy. We have this fact. We have this fact that humans are created in the image of God. And this is what allows us to have these inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. America has not been great at implementing these things throughout its history, but it is within the founding document.
If that were true, if that's based on God and all this other shit, like in Christianity, then slavery wouldn't have happened. If it was truly part of like this whole Christian thought, this modern idea of the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, then there should have been no slavery at the start.
We can point out that a theocracy was one of the first countries to outlaw slavery. I mean, you have to remember that the only two. I mean, look at the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, was a theocracy back then. I mean, you have the head of the church being the head of state. Iran is the only country that currently still does the same thing. You have England being the first Western country based on their Anglican law code, declaring that slavery is not something that can happen there. We have in the North, by the way, it was the radical Christians that were supporting abolition the whole time. It was the Methodists. It was William Lloyd Garrison. It was Nat Turner, who was a preacher, who were all saying that the institution of slavery was sinful and that its propagators were workers of iniquity and workers of the devil. It was people who promoted religious tolerance, by the way, and who promoted this sort of whatever, like Jefferson Davis, by the way. Jefferson Davis wrote that the New Englanders who were yelling all about slavery were, just re-engaging in their old puritanical witch hunt activities. You have these people who are not on the side of including God in civil law, defending and propagating slavery. You have the theologians that are defending slavery only by referring to a vague passage where it says beasts of the field, and they say, well, that must be the slaves, or this vague interpolation about Ham. And then you have them modifying the Bible to fit their own agenda, of which there is no greater sin. Meanwhile, in the North, you have the radical Puritans, the people who read the Bible twice every day, saying that slavery is sin and that its propagators are workers of the devil. How does that make sense in your formulation?
And I would say that the people that were part of the abolition movement, regardless of whoever's interpretation of the Bible or whatnot, they at their core were anti-slavery.
And you know what? They would tell you at their core that they were Christians. John Brown didn't stand up and say, right, I'm taking an oath in front of my principles. He said,
well, I'm sorry, I've removed you from it because my point is in all of this is that the people in the North who were Christian and were abolitionists, they also have counterparts in the South who are doing the exact same thing with the exact same book. Okay, so you can't sit there and say, oh, the real Christians were the ones that were abolitionists. The not real Christians were the ones that were promoting slavery. Christians promoted both ideas, which means that it's not a Christian thing.
Well, actually, I can, because here's the thing. It is a great sin in the Bible to modify the words of God. The slave masters did that exact thing by removing
the abolitionists
Exodus.
Had to do the exact same thing.
No,
too.
They didn't. The abolitionists,
yes, they did.
The Puritan. I dare you to find me one instance of a puritanical abolitionist modifying the Bible, like publishing his own Bible and saying this is actually the right Bible and this one doesn't include slavery. The Puritans,
no. They
the puritanical
they selectively chose which portions of the Bible were important to their movement. In the North, it was the abolitionists, and they focused on the verses and all of the themes about freedom, especially in Exodus and everything like that. While those in the South, the Christians in the South, they focused on like Leviticus 25:44 through 46 and all of the laws concerning slavery down there. So, I mean, what you have are both sides manipulating the words of the Bible. It doesn't have to be them putting out their own version of the Bible or anything like that. They were both manipulating the Bible in order to push their own agendas, which seemed to me to indicate that it's not Christianity that gave birth to abolitionism or to slavery. It's humans and their personal positions on these topics that drove that.
So I would say that this may be the case. Well, this is about morality, so at least we're on a tangent that's on topic. If we look at the diaries of Southerners from the time, they're acknowledging that their system is horrible. If you look at the diary of Marie Chestnut, who is a diarist who existed in the Civil War era, she writes in her diary, ours is a monstrous system. She is a Christian. She professes to be a Christian, excuse me. And she publicly favored the institution of slavery in her actions and in her political stances. But she wrote in her diary, as did many others, ours is a monstrous system. There is a private acknowledgement in the upper echelons of the Southern aristocratic society that what they're doing is immoral, that what they're doing is bad and wrong. I challenge you to find a diary of William Lloyd Garrison where he goes, yeah, I'm just manipulating the Bible to say we should free people.
I mean, that's one person's opinion of the system that they lived in.
I mean, I can find a ton other, but I got to cite. I mean, I got to cite a source
because of what the Bible says about slavery. You really can't get around the verses that talk about slavery.
They didn't practice it because of that reason. They practiced it because it was in their economic benefit to keep people in slavery.
It was in both. It was in their economic benefit, but it was also because it was in their faith. Anyways, Gabriel, I'm so glad that you were able to come on here and tell
I wish
us
I could
about
shake your hand. You're a good
human
guy.
fucking. Yeah. Anyways, I'll let you tell everybody, remind everybody, who you are, where they can find you, and all that kind of good stuff, and
Of
then
course.
we can get on out of here.
So, of course, I'll remind the people, I love this debate, nothing personal, obviously. We raise our voice at each other, we get angry, but it's all in good fun. I have nothing but goodwill towards you, my friend. I believe what you're doing, by the way, is with the purest of intellectual intentions. And that's really more than I can say for 90% of people who debate on any issue, quite frankly. You're a good faith arguer, and that's what I have to say. Once again, I'm Gabriel Urban. I have a little button. No, I can't point to the side. I have a little button down here. You can find me at amrevfront.com. I do all other sorts of things like that. I love to have these debates. I know that the last debate we had, the commenters called me, Kent Hovens Jr. Somebody called me a white supremacist. I'm Native American. Come on. I get, I'm not white. I mean, I know the lighting may make me look a certain way. I'm Native American. But no, I will note this. You can find me at amrevfront.com. I do stuff within the Democratic Party. I know this may be surprising considering my quite conservative theological takes, but I am a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, big supporter of unions, big supporter of increasing the minimum wage, and a big opponent of hypocrisy, by the way. And I would say thank you very much for having me on. It's always a great opportunity to talk to you. I love to see the comments on here. I'm glad that I got that article in there about psychopathy. I'm sure. When was the last time we debated? 3 years ago. I'll see you in 2026. We can schedule this as a regular, 3 times a decade sort of thing. I'm sure we'll all grow older and wiser. So thank you very much for having me on. God bless you, even if you don't want.
Yeah. Well, I do appreciate you coming on, and I had a fun time. And yeah, I try to be a good faith interlocutor, even if I, get heated like I do. But I'm glad that you came on and you were able to suffer through my potty mouth. I did miss a few things. So Heckett became a member. Thank you so much there, Heckett. Appreciate you so much. And then reading between the lines, they said, I'm going to go broke, and did another $20. So I appreciate
I'm good
you
for the
reading
press.
between the lines.
I'm good. Look at this. Look how much money I've made you. How much money did you make in your last stream?
I don't know, over $100 maybe.
Oh, well, this one's only 32. Maybe I'm bad for ratings. Never mind.
Anyways, appreciate you coming on, and I guess we will see all you heathens later. Don't forget to stand up, use your voice, and all that kind of good shit. Bye, heathens.
See y'all in 3 years.